There comes a moment in every person's life when the weight of too much becomes impossible to carry any longer. Too much giving, too much bending, too much pretending that exhaustion is strength and silence is peace. You reach a threshold where your spirit whispers, not loudly at first, but with unshakable clarity, no more. It is in this moment that something ancient inside you finally stirs. The part of you that remembers who you were before life taught you to shrink. The part that refuses to keep pouring into places where you are unseen, unheard, or unvalued. The part that knows your soul was never meant to be a container for other people's chaos. When you say no more, you are not rejecting others. You are remembering yourself. You are declaring that your energy is sacred, your boundaries are real, and your heart is no longer available for the work of saving people who refuse to save themselves. This is not selfishness. This is the beginning of self-respect. Saying no more is the first step in reclaiming your identity. The moment you stop tolerating what wounds you, you begin awakening to the truth of what strengthens you. You discover that you were never weak for caring. You were only exhausted from caring alone. You learn that love is not proven by suffering, and loyalty is not measured by how much pain you're willing to endure. A strange kind of light emerges when you finally step back from the people and patterns that drain you. You begin hearing your own voice again, clear, steady, certain. You start feeling your own presence, solid, grounded, worthy, and slowly the world begins to reflect back what you have always deserved: respect, reciprocity, and peace. The self-love that awakens after saying no more is not loud, flashy, or dramatic. It is quiet and undeniable. It is the love that rebuilds your inner world, the love that restores your intuition, the love that teaches you that you never needed to be chosen. You needed to choose yourself, and once you do, everything in your life shifts, not because the world becomes softer, but because you become stronger. Not because people change, but because you stop abandoning the person you were born to be. You walk differently, you speak differently, you love differently, you finally live as someone who knows their own worth and refuses to negotiate it. Because the moment you say no more is the moment you begin to come home to yourself. True transformation begins the moment you refuse to tolerate what harms your peace or drains your spirit. It doesn't happen in a flash of inspiration or a moment of perfect clarity. It happens quietly, often in the privacy of your inner world, the place where you finally admit to yourself that something in your life has been costing you far more than you ever realized. You start to notice the heaviness you've been carrying, the exhaustion that has become normal, the subtle ways your heart tenses when a certain name appears on your phone, or when you walk into an environment that no longer feels healthy. You begin to feel the truth in your body before your mind fully understands it. Your spirit has been giving too much, and the imbalance has become unbearable. Transformation begins when you stop explaining away the discomfort, when you stop telling yourself that things will magically get better if you just stay quiet, stay patient, or stay loyal. You recognize that your peace is not negotiable, and your energy is not an endless resource to be drained by situations or people who give nothing in return. The moment you refuse to tolerate what depletes you, you step out of survival mode and into a deeper form of awareness. You begin asking the questions you once avoided. Why am I accepting this? What am I afraid will happen if I walk away? Who taught me that enduring pain was the price of being loved? In that questioning, you awaken something powerful: self-respect, not the superficial kind that demands attention, but the internal conviction that your soul deserves gentleness, your heart deserves reciprocity, and your mind deserves clarity. When you finally refuse to tolerate what harms your peace, you stop betraying yourself in the name of keeping the peace with others. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop giving people access to parts of you they haven't earned. And for the first time, you witness how your energy shifts when you no longer allow what drains you to stay. What follows is not immediate perfection, but a gradual strengthening. You begin to reclaim your inner space. You learn to trust your intuition, the same quiet voice that warned you long before you were ready to listen. You discover that transformation is less about changing into someone new and more about returning to someone you abandoned while trying to be everything for everyone else. And each time you choose peace over chaos, truth over denial, and self-worth over fear, you become more aligned with the life that was meant for you. Saying no more is not a rejection of others. It is an act of remembering and reclaiming yourself. It is the moment when you finally recognize that your life cannot continue to revolve around pleasing, fixing, or accommodating people who are disconnected from your well-being. For so long you may have molded yourself to fit the expectations of others, stretching your boundaries, softening your truth, and silencing your discomfort just to maintain harmony. But harmony built on self-betrayal is never real harmony. It is emotional survival dressed as loyalty. When you say no more, you are not pushing anyone away, you are simply stepping out of a role that was never yours to play. This decision does not come from anger, bitterness, or ego. It comes from a deeper awareness that something inside you has been quietly suffering. You begin to notice the parts of yourself you abandoned, the dreams you postponed, the needs you dismissed, the intuition you ignored because you were too busy trying to be acceptable or easy to love. The moment you whisper no more, you awaken to the truth that you too deserve the devotion you freely give to others. You deserve the same protection, same care, and same patience you offer so generously, and you deserve to exist in spaces where your worth is acknowledged without negotiation. Reclaiming yourself often feels like stepping into unfamiliar territory, not because it is new, but because you've been disconnected from it for so long. You start listening to your inner voice again, the voice that once guided you before you learned to doubt your own worth. You begin honoring the boundaries you once dismissed. You decide that your heart is not a place for people who come only to take. You choose yourself not out of selfishness, but out of necessity, understanding that your life cannot flourish while you continue abandoning your own needs. As you reclaim yourself, the world around you subtly shifts. Relationships that relied on your silence begin to fall away. Patterns that demanded your self-sacrifice lose their power over you. You become more grounded, more present, more aware of what aligns with you and what distorts you. In choosing yourself, you are not rejecting anyone. You are simply ending the chapter where you kept giving people permission to write your story. You are returning to the person you were before guilt, fear, and obligation taught you to forget yourself. And that return is the most profound act of self-respect you will ever choose. Boundaries are not walls, but expressions of self-respect and protection of your emotional energy. They are not meant to shut people out. They are meant to keep your inner world from being shaped by forces that do not honor it. For much of your life, you may have been taught that saying no is unkind, that pulling back is selfish, or that taking space makes you difficult to love. But what you eventually learn is that a life without boundaries is a life where you slowly disappear, piece by piece, choice by choice, until your identity becomes a reflection of everyone else's expectations but your own. A boundary is simply the recognition of where you end and someone else begins. It is the understanding that your time, your heart, and your energy have value. When you set boundaries, you are not closing your heart. You are protecting the tenderness that makes your heart worth knowing. You are safeguarding the parts of yourself that were once taken for granted or exploited, and you are refusing to allow others to define what you owe them at the cost of what you owe yourself. Many people fear boundaries because they equate them with rejection or conflict, but boundaries are the opposite of rejection. They are clarity. They tell others how to love you, how to approach you, and how to remain in connection with you without causing harm. They are invitations to healthy communication, not barriers to intimacy. In truth, boundaries make your relationships stronger because they prevent resentment from growing in the spaces where you once stayed silent. When you begin setting boundaries, you may feel a discomfort that almost convinces you to retreat. This discomfort is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is the unfamiliar feeling of no longer abandoning yourself. You may witness people reacting with confusion or resistance, not because your boundary is unfair, but because they benefited from your lack of one. Still, you persist because your emotional well-being is no longer something you are willing to sacrifice for the convenience of others. As you grow more comfortable honoring your limits, something profound happens. Your energy returns to you. The fatigue you once normalized begins to fade. The anxiety that lived in your chest loosens its grip. You start living with intention instead of obligation. You realize that boundaries do not diminish your kindness. They preserve it. They allow you to give without depletion, to love without losing yourself, and to exist without constantly negotiating your worth. In setting them, you are simply saying, "My heart is valuable, my peace is sacred, and I am worthy of the space I need to thrive." You stop confusing suffering with love, and finally understand that real connection never demands self-betrayal. For so long you may have believed that love required endurance of neglect, of disappointment, of emotional inconsistency. You learned to equate depth with difficulty, thinking that the more you sacrificed, the more meaningful the bond became. You tolerated pain because you were told it was proof of loyalty, and you held on even when your heart felt threadbare, but with time something inside you begins to question why love is always the place where you feel the most depleted. You start noticing that the moments you call love often feel more like recovering from wounds you never should have received. Slowly, you begin to understand that suffering is not a currency that buys closeness. It doesn't make someone appreciate you more, nor does it deepen connection. If anything, it disconnects you from yourself. Every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, every time you swallow your hurt to keep someone else comfortable, every time you shrink your needs to appear easy to love, you abandon a piece of yourself. And the deeper the self-abandonment, the harder it becomes to recognize what genuine love is supposed to feel like. Real connection does not thrive where self-betrayal exists. It doesn't demand that you diminish your feelings or hide your insecurities. It doesn't ask you to become smaller so someone else can feel bigger. Love that is true invites your fullness, your voice, your boundaries, your fears, your desires. It welcomes the complexity of who you are instead of punishing you for being human. A real bond strengthens you, it doesn't drain you. It gives you room to breathe, not reasons to doubt your own worth. When you stop mistaking suffering for love, you begin to see the patterns you once normalized. You recognize the relationships that relied on your silence, the connections that required your exhaustion, the people who claimed to care but only when caring cost them nothing. And as this clarity grows, you no longer tolerate the kind of love that wounds you. You choose to protect the peace within yourself, even if it means disappointing others. In this shift, you rediscover a truer form of love, one rooted in mutual respect, emotional safety, and honesty. You realize that connection is not proven by how much you endure, but by how deeply you feel seen and valued without sacrificing any part of yourself. And in honoring this truth, you create space for relationships that nourish your spirit instead of depleting it. As you release draining patterns and people, your inner voice becomes clearer, and your identity strengthens. At first, it may feel like a quiet unraveling, stepping back from the familiar, letting go of routines that once felt like obligations, or distancing yourself from individuals who have shaped your emotional landscape for far too long. The absence feels strange, almost unsettling, because what drains you often becomes what you unconsciously adapt to. You grow accustomed to noise, to tension, to the feeling of being stretched beyond your limits. But once you begin removing what weighs on your spirit, you realize how deeply those attachments were blurring your sense of self. When the emotional clutter starts to fall away, something profound happens. Your intuition returns. The voice within you, the one you silence to maintain relationships, to avoid conflict, or to protect other people's comfort, begins to speak again. At first it whispers, a subtle feeling that something doesn't align, a gentle nudge that you deserve more, a quiet knowing that your peace matters. This voice was never gone. It was simply drowned out by the demands and expectations of everything and everyone that drained you. As you release those burdens, the voice grows louder, firmer, and more trustworthy. You start hearing yourself instead of the echoes of others' opinions. You begin recognizing what you genuinely want, rather than what you were conditioned to accept. Decisions become less about pleasing others and more about honoring your inner truth. The more space you clear, the more clearly you see who you were before life taught you to compromise yourself for the sake of belonging. As this inner clarity grows, so does your identity. You no longer define yourself by the roles you played in draining situations: rescuer, fixer, peacemaker, absorber of others' chaos. You rediscover the parts of you that existed before exhaustion became your default state. You reconnect with the strengths, instincts, and desires you once buried under responsibility and emotional noise, and in doing so, you begin to stand firmer in who you are. Releasing what drains you is not just an act of letting go, it is an act of returning to your values, to your integrity, to your emotional autonomy. You become more grounded, more confident, and more aligned with your purpose. You understand yourself more deeply, and that understanding becomes the foundation for a life that no longer bends under the weight of what was never meant to stay. Self-love, awakened through firm boundaries, reshapes your life, guiding you toward healthier relationships and a deeper sense of worth. When you begin honoring your limits, something shifts inside you. Your relationship with yourself transforms first. You no longer tolerate the emotional erosion that comes from giving more than you receive or staying in spaces where your presence is taken for granted. Instead, you begin to treat your time, your heart, and your energy as valuable resources. This internal shift becomes the foundation of your renewed self-worth, and from this foundation, every aspect of your life begins to reorganize itself. Firm boundaries are a declaration of what you will and will not allow, not out of fear, but out of respect for your own emotional ecosystem. When you uphold these boundaries consistently, you teach yourself that your well-being is worth protecting. You stop bending to accommodate people who refuse to meet you with equal effort. You stop making excuses for behavior that hurts you. You no longer feel guilty for prioritizing your own peace. And as this self-respect grows, you begin attracting relationships that align with it. Connections that honor your individuality instead of requiring you to diminish it. As your sense of worth strengthens, your vision becomes clearer. You start noticing the difference between those who value your boundaries and those who only valued your compliance. The people who genuinely care will adapt with you. They will respect the new structure of your energy because they want to share space with you in a healthy way. Those who were attached to your lack of boundaries may resist, but their resistance only highlights how necessary the change was. This clarity becomes a filter, helping you discern which relationships nourish you and which deplete you. With stronger boundaries, you also begin relating to yourself differently. You follow through on promises you make to your own heart. You trust yourself more deeply because you no longer abandon your needs for temporary approval. You begin choosing environments that support your growth, conversations that uplift you, and relationships that reflect the love you have cultivated within. The more consistently you honor your boundaries, the more your life aligns with your authenticity. Self-love that emerges from firm boundaries is powerful because it is lived, not spoken. It becomes visible in your decisions, your posture, your confidence, and your emotional clarity. It leads you toward people who see your value and away from anything that diminishes it. And in living this way, your life becomes a reflection of the worth you finally recognize within yourself. In the end, transformation is not born from grand gestures or dramatic moments. It rises quietly from the choices you make each day to honor yourself. Every boundary you set, every truth you speak, every step you take away from what drains you is a declaration that your life belongs to you again. You begin to realize that the love you were seeking from others was always meant to be rooted within you first. And with that awareness, you stop chasing validation and start embodying worth. You become someone who no longer apologizes for existing, someone who no longer shrinks to maintain peace, someone who finally recognizes the power of choosing themselves. This is where real freedom begins, not in walking away from others, but in walking back toward the person you were before self-betrayal became a habit. So let this be the moment you rise into your strength. Let it be the moment you decide that your heart is not a place for chaos, your energy is not a resource for the ungrateful, and your spirit is not meant to carry what was never yours. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to demand reciprocity. You are allowed to choose a life that honors your worth. because when you say no more, your healing begins, your identity returns, and your self-love finally awakens into its fullest, most powerful form.